Hwei is one of the most unique champions in the game. He has been on the receiving end of a lot of buffs over and over and over again. And especially with the latest set of buffs, I thought it would be a good idea to do a Hwei guide. Welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about Hwei today. Hwei is a very strong and flexible champion if we know how to play him. And the if is a very big and bold word right here, because if you don't know how to play Hwei, you're going to be extremely useless onto this champion. His learning curve is very steep. He has 9 abilities like no other champion in the game. And this actually means that we are a very flexible champion, that we have a lot of tools for different situations, but that we have to make the right decision to use those tools in the right situations. And I think that's the most tricky part about Hwei, and I also think that that's why people have been struggling up until this point with this champion. Because if you actually take a look at people that are quite experienced on the Hwei and that do have a certain amount of champion mastery, they're actually faring really well on this champion. And at that point, this champion actually becomes extremely good. Freak already said it himself. He thinks Hwei in his current state is absolutely broken, especially because they're still buffing him. But that's only at the highest levels of play and the most mastery on this champion. So this guide is going to be for beginners, people that want to learn Hwei, don't know where to start. As we said, right, Hwei has a very steep learning curve. If you're new to this champion, you're probably going to be asking, why am I even playing this champion when I'm having so much issues and losing every game? That is because this champion's learning curve is very steep, and I'm going to be walking you through what you want to be doing and how you can actually pick this champion up as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and where to start. But this guide is also for Hwei players, so that are players that are already playing Hwei and they want to refine and optimize their playstyle. This guide will cover a few things that you possibly haven't thought about or that you weren't actively thinking about. Or it's just going to give you a little bit of a different perspective on Hwei. And this guide will actually focus on how to win games on Hwei. Winning games on Hwei can be a little tricky if you don't know how to do it. And we're going to be talking about a lot of reference points, things that you can look to do in the game to make it easier, to give you a little bit of a step-by-step process of the things that you want to be focusing on in the game to actually win. So what are we going to be covering in this guide today? We're going to be covering a lot of ability usage and micro stuff about Hwei. There's a lot of little things that are very good to understand. We're going to be covering early lane, of course. We're going to be covering different style and types of matchups, how to approach them. We're also going to be covering mid-game, and mainly in the mid-game, on how to actually translate leads or even game states into victory on Hwei. And of course, we're going to be showing you guys a lot of examples, a lot of good examples, but also some that are a bit less good and show you what not to do. So let's get into it. So what kind of champion is Hwei? Hwei is a low mobility backline mage that really relies on hitting skill shots. He has a few flavors from different champions. I think he has some flavors from an Orianna. I think he has some flavors from Vel'Koz. He has some flavors from Karma. It's a bit of a chameleon in a sense that he has multiple different flavors that he can basically use. There's also multiple ways that you can play Hwei, funnily enough. You can play him as a real damage carry while building a lot of AP and building a lot of flat pen. Can definitely work. But you can also play him a bit more as a utility champion. And both identities are playable in different kind of game states. They have, of course, have an ideal game state that they want to be playing in. And I think the most common identity for Hwei is a bit more of the utility style. I think his kit suits him a little bit better in that aspect. You build a lot of CDR, you're going to be spamming a lot of QEs in the mid to late game, you're going to be making it really hard for the enemies to enter with our zone control. But in the early game, he's actually a little bit of a lane bully if you can get into right position. So there's a lot to him, and we're going to be covering that more in depth in the certain sections of the guide. So Hwei is a good champion to add to your pool because of a few reasons. First of all, he's very flexible. As we talked about, he has 9 abilities, a lot of abilities for different scenarios, and That means that if you're really good on him, you're going to be very useful in a lot of cases. That also means that he has a very steep mastery curve. So if you put the effort into the champion, you'll actually get results with the champion. How nice is that to hear? If you, for example, put a lot of effort into Garen, comparatively, the results are going to be a bit lower. And Hwei's a champion that if you put a lot of effort into him, you're going to be studying him, learning him, reviewing him, playing a lot of games with him. You're actually going to be become a very good Hwei, which is going to make it much easier for you to win games compared to new Hwei players. And finally, and I think this is one of the best reasons to actually pick up Hwei, is he is on Riot's radar. And what do I mean with Riot's radar? This means that this is going to be a bit of a champion that is going to be favored by Riot. For example, just like K'Sante. K'Sante, practically always strong. Why? Because he has a playstyle that Riot really wants to show in pro play. Hwei is going to be very, very similar. This champion is going to be making sure that the pro mid laners are going to be picking him because of how unique that a lot of parts of his kit are, and Riot wants to push that for pro play. So they're going to try everything to put him in a good spot, and that's what makes a good Hwei player also very, very efficient in solo queue. So Hwei is definitely going to be one of Riot's favorite champions. Also a good reason to pick him up. So we're going to be talking about Hwei's rune page. And this is going to be a little bit controversial because there's just so many options. And I'm just going to be walking you guys through the options and make you guys understand why stuff works and in which situations, for example, adaptations can work. So we're going to be starting off with the stock standard rune page, which is Comet. I think Comet is probably the best rune for Hwei to take because he's going to be proccing a lot of abilities from long range, and Comet can then add towards that damage. He also has a lot of CC and utility in his kit. So it's also quite easy to land the Comet. Mana for blend because he needs mana. He's going to be an ability spammer most of the times. So having that extra mana regeneration is necessary. Now we're going to be coming to a little bit more of the variable ones, and we're going to be starting off with Transcendence and Absolute Focus right here. So some people prefer Absolute Focus, some people prefer Transcendence. Why did I highlight Transcendence, and why do I think Transcendence is currently the best rune for the playstyle? Transcendence gives CDR. And CDR is actually it's a stat that after the new season changes is a bit more rare and harder to get to. So the value of CDR has actually gone up, and this rune actually gives the same amount of CDR. Hwei wants a lot of CDR, especially if you're opting in for the bit more utility type of identity of Hwei, then this rune is going to be the go-to. If you're the type of player that wants to be playing for one shot, for burst, then of course you can go Absolute Focus. It's also a really good rune on Hwei because Hwei usually stays a bit more in the backline, stays healthy, and if you're above 70% health, you're going to get a lot of AP, which means that you deal more damage. But don't be fooled. Hwei's AP ratios have been buffed a lot, but before that they weren't that high. So yeah, the value of it is, of course, it's a bit controversial. It really depends on what you want to be doing in the game. We're also going to be moving on to Scorch or Gathering Storm. Also, both options are completely valid. And I think Scorch is a really good option. It basically empowers your early lane that is already quite strong. But I think Scorch is a bit dangerous, especially if you're going to be looking at lower elos. While Gathering Storm, I think, is a bit more consistent option on Hwei, because I think Gathering Storm much more suits his playstyle compared to Scorch. Yes, he's a lane bully, and in a lot of cases, he's going to get a lot of use out of Scorch. But I think if you really want to be playing with the utility style of Hwei and play a bit more skill-oriented, there's usually going to be a lot of threat in the game. Then Gathering Storm, it basically suits your playstyle. You want to sit back and you want to farm up, hit your item spikes, get a lot of AP, and then be a menace in the mid to late game. Then when it comes to the secondary tree, I would say this is also quite variable. If you like to take boots, can take boots, but usually I'd like to get early lucidities, or like at least somewhat early. If you like the triple tonic, you can take triple tonic, it's fine. It's a bit less useful than other triple tonic users. But I think in most cases, Cookie plus Cosmic Insight has been the best use case for me. The reason for that is early game mana can be a little bit low, and cookies can actually help us with the early game mana problem, and that can help us push us over the edge to actually bully enemy champions out of the lane. And if we don't have the mana, it can be a little bit more tricky, because in the early lane we're going to be using a lot of Qs. It takes a lot of mana, and we want to be spamming that onto the enemy, and cookies really help with that. So it makes our lane a bit stronger. And Cosmic Insight, I think, is a very good option, because Cosmic Insight gives us lower flash cooldown. Hwei is very immobile, very vulnerable, very low self-peel, so having flash up is usually going to be the difference between us dying or staying alive. Give or take Jarvan ult. And this gives a lot of value to that. Then when it comes to what kind of shards do we want to take? So I think the CDR shard is really good on Hwei. I explained already before, the value of CDR has gone up because there's less CDR in the game when it comes to the items. And right now, you actually take Adaptive Force and Health. But with the new patch, this is going to be changing to move speed and tenacity and all sorts of those stats. You can still take Adaptive. If you want move speed is probably really good as well. And I would say we're mainly going to be aiming for the scaling health option in the new patch, which is going to grant us more health already starting level 6. Unless we're really in need of the flat health because of early game threat. There's some champs like Aurelia and Fizz that it might be very useful into. But that's a little bit theorizing, because we just don't know yet. As for other rune page options, we also have Domination as a secondary tree. Why? Because Hwei is one of the best cheap shot users in the game. Cheap shot is a rune that applies extra true damage after you land CC onto the enemies. And because our E actually ticks multiple times, our E in itself already procs cheap shot, which gives us a lot of damage. You can basically get to like 1 or 2k true damage at the end of a game if you're going to be spamming a lot of QEs. So it's a very valuable rune on Hwei. As for the secondary tree in the Domination right here, I think Ingenious Hunter is really good, because we're going to be running a few items that have cooldowns. For example, Horizon Focus, for example, Luden's Companion, or for example, Seraph's Embrace. These are all items that have Zonias, Banshees. They're all value from this. And the value of this is really insane, because you basically get 20 item haste on its own. And if you get basically 6 per stack. So you can cap up to 50. And 50 haste means that you halve the cooldown of it. So that's really valuable in a lot of cases on Hwei. And it also helps with trinkets, which is also really good on Hwei, because it's going to be very hard for you to face check. So having the blue trinket up a lot is going to be super valuable. And then finally, we also have Resolve Tree. Resolve Tree, always nice as an option, especially if we're going to be playing against the likes of Aurelia, Fizz, champs that really want to kill you, get onto you. If you feel uncomfortable with any of the other options, this is also an option that you can take, but it's mainly preference. If you feel a little bit cocky, you can also just get away with Cookies and Cosmic Insight. If we have proper fundamentals, it's that easy. But this can be a little bit of a safety net if we feel pressured by those matchups. So we're going to be talking about Hwei's build, and I want you to stick around for this one a little bit longer, because we're not only going to be taking a look at these items here, I'm also going to be taking a look at Lolalytics, and I'm going to be explaining you guys why certain items work on him and why certain items do not work on him. So first of all, we can go 2 routes when we're playing Hwei. We can play a bit more bursty, and we can more utility focused. So usually if we're playing bursty, we're going to be going for Ludens. It gives us more upfront damage. It also pairs together with Sorcery Shoes because we want to get Magic Pen, and then both Shadow Flame or Storm Surge, depending on what you prefer, are very good items to build secondary in this more bursty type of Hwei style. When we're going to utility style of Hwei, we're going to be aiming for Tier into Zeraphs. We can also do Tier into one of the utility items and then do Zeraphs after, depending on what you want, but we at least need the mana from the Tier. But Tier into Zeraphs is usual with the Lucidity Boots, and then we want to be building an item that gives a little bit more ability haste usually. So usually we're opting in for Horizon Focus or Cosmic Drive secondary. But if we're versus really tanky members, we might also be able to opt in for Liandry's. It kind of depends on a game per game basis. As long as you understand, okay, we're playing for CDR, we're playing for a bit more utility, a bit more in the backline, going for these QEs, and these items synergize really well with that style of playing Hwei. So we're going to be taking a look at Lolalytics right here, and we're going to be breaking down why certain items work on him and why certain items do not work on him. So do not fear about the win rate right now, because this is, of course, with the pre-fully buffed Hwei. But the items will probably stay around the same stats, because the items don't change too much except for Horizon Focus, which is going to be a little bit better. But let's talk about these core items that Hwei wants. Hwei needs a mana item. So that's the mindset behind Hwei. Hwei needs one mana item, otherwise he's going to run So we're going to be either getting Malignants, Ludens, or Seraphs. And then we're going to be taking a look at why is Malignance's win rate so low. It gives a ultimate haste and it shreds MR under his ultimate. That's because Malignance, if we look closely, actually procs, and the radius increases based on the damage done. So what happens with Hwei, if Hwei ults someone, it actually has a DOT effect instead of having a big burst of damage. So the radius of Malignance is just extremely, extremely small. And that's why Malignance is such an underpowered item in Hwei, and it's really unfortunate. Because I do think otherwise the item would fit really well with Hwei. But the Hate Fog, basically active, passive, just doesn't work well on him, sadly. But we have two other amazing options in Lunan's Companion. If we want to go for the bit more bursty style, this is a fine option. I do rather think that this item is not that strong right now. And I think stats-wise, for example, Ludens that we had before was a little bit better. So this item, it's fine, but I do think that stats-wise, Seraphs is a little bit better. Or Archangel Staff, that is. Also because I think this item is actually kind of nice for Hwei, because this grants a little bit of self-peel. If you drop low, you're going to be able to get a shield, and I think that this is very valuable as Hwei, being Hwei, because Hwei is very vulnerable to a lot of threat, and this item can actually prevent us getting one-shot in a lot of situations. So that's why I also think if we look at the win rates right here, that Seraphs has the highest win rate by a landslide. It's about 2% compared to Ludens. So I think Seraphs is definitely the best first item in general for Hwei. When it comes to mana, and we need mana. If we look at boots, right? Boots are both good. Storks works, Lucidity Boots works, win rate's about a little bit over 1% difference. And we're also going to be looking at the pick rate and the games played. If it doesn't have enough games played, I'm not going to cover it, because then, I want some valid stats here, not some random stats. So both Lucidities and Sorcery Shoes are good, depending on what style of Hwei that you want to be playing. If we're going a bit more utility focused, I think Lucidities fit very nice with it. Otherwise, Sorcery Shoes are also fine. When it comes to the second item, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. What we see right here is that if we, just generally, Shadow Flame is quite a good item, Leander is quite a good item, Horizon Focus is quite a good item, Storms is also quite a good item. So everything is a little bit okay. So what we see is that it's just really game dependent in this situation. And that's completely fine. That means that we gotta be flexible and we gotta understand what item fits each situation. If we're playing against a lot of tanks and we want some more health, we go Liandry's. If we're not quite sure, I think actually Horizon Focus, especially next patch, is going to be probably his best second item. If we want more CDR and we want more utility when it comes to kiting and move speed, Cosmic Drive is also completely fine. But if we're playing the bursty style, of course, we're either going Storm Surge, Shadow Flame. Then third item. I think third item, if we haven't went Horizon Focus, I think Horizon Focus is really good for playing against a lot of tanks. I actually think that Liandry's is quite good, but if the enemies are somewhat squishy and currently the meta isn't like, it's solo queue, there's usually a lot of damage and there isn't too many tanks running around, then Rabadon's death cap is really good. His AP scaling did get bumped up a little bit. So Rabadon's death cap, especially if we go like Gathering Storm, it really makes sense to build that item. Afterwards, always going to be somewhat adaptive towards what the game state asks. And the final thing I want to talk to you guys about right here is what kind of items are like really good with Hwei otherwise. Like we can really take a look at the isolated item stats on Hwei right here. And that is that when Hwei wins, these are the stats of his items. We can see that very solid item is Banshees, gives self-peel. It has enough games to be valid. This not really. I don't think that's enough games. Cosmic Drive, controversial. I know Nemesis builds this a lot. I think it's a good item. I think it's fine. But I do think Horizon Focus is probably his best item, especially next patch. So what we're mainly going to be looking at is we're going to mainly looking at Seraphs into Horizon Focus or Tier into Horizon Focus and then Seraphs. I think that's most likely going to be his core build where you cannot really go wrong with it. And the reason why Horizon Focus is so good, I think that's really important to mention. The reason why Horizon Focus is so good on Hwei is because he has the ability to proc it. Of course, he has the ability to proc it. But the reason why it's so good is because his damage gets increased by 10%. So this this item may not give the best possible stats, and you may seem okay, like Storm Surge gives more damage when you look to stats, right? But 10% increased damage. If you understand what that means, it's actually a lot. So 10% increased damage means that you deal more damage when it comes to your AP scalings, but you also deal more damage when it comes to your base damages. So Hwei has incredibly high base damages already, and if they get increased by 10%, that's even more damage. So this is a really, really good item, especially if you take a look at the high base damage on his Q, his QQ and his QW, the base damage on it is absolutely ridiculous. So this item fares really, really well with Hwei's kit, and that's why it's so unbelievably good. And of course, Hwei wants to keep people in range, so you just proc it a lot. So probably this is his best secondary item. When it comes to builds, right, like we're new in the season, it's a bit up in the air, everything. It makes sense that people are confused, that people are not sure what they want to be building, what they want to be doing. I think if you're unsure, go Xeraths into Horizon Focus and you should be fine. But over time, I think they will change a lot of items, shape it up until it's all a little bit more balanced. It's a bit more rough right now. And what's then going to happen is then we're going to be sure what the actual best build is for Hwei. So it's a little bit speculative right now. And if there's one guaranteed build or the meta changes and a different build is much better, I will update you guys on it and I will let you know either in the comments or with a new video. So I want to stand still for this extremely, extremely important setting for Hwei. The difference between having this on and off can be the difference between you landing your abilities more consistently rather than missing them or mispositioning because you're trying to hit them. This setting, if it's turned off, what's going to happen is if you click, for example, your QW range. This is Hwei, this is your QW range. If you click your QW right here, Hwei first needs to walk into distance before he's going to throw the QW. But if you have this setting on, if Hwei is going to be standing in the middle, he's going to throw it at the edge of his range. So this really helps with, for example, the QW. It really helps with the EE. It really helps with the EW and get easier max range abilities because of this. And what I have really found is that Hwei really becomes a lot easier hitting his kill shots if you have this setting on. Of course, there's also a downside to the setting. That means that if you want to go for like flash ease, flash ease, it doesn't really work. But in my experience, the times that you want to go for that are so limited that I think it's worth turning this setting on. But in the end, what I really recommend is that you figure out what you like. If you like the setting, play with it. If you don't like the setting, don't play with it. But do keep in mind is that tethering the ranges will be a little bit easier if we have it on rather than have it off. That way, if we have it off, we just gotta really get granular and really get a good feeling of the exact ranges of the champion. Each has its upside, each has its downside. I really want you guys to know that this option is really important for Hwei, and that I want you guys to play around with it. So we're going to be talking about Hwei's abilities. And the reason I really wanted to include this slide in the guide is because he's so unique and he has so many different abilities that it's really good to understand the identity of each of these abilities. And with understanding of this identity, it's also going to be much easier for us to start using the correct ability in the right situation in game. So we're going to be starting off with the passive. The passive is actually quite easy. If you land 2 consecutive abilities within 4 seconds onto an enemy, it basically explodes. There's a small area of explosion under the enemies on the ground that just deals damage. It's not much more to it. One thing to keep in mind with this passive is that it has no cooldown. So because this passive has no cooldown, you can actually proc it over and over and over again. And because you have 4 abilities in your kit, it's usually Q, W, E, and in a lot of cases also the R. You can, if you do a full combo, you can proc your passive twice onto a target. Moving on to his Q. So his Q is his damaging ability. And all of his forms of Q are meant to deal damage towards the enemies. This is also going to be the ability that we're going to be maxing first, because usually damage is what we're aiming to do. So starting off with Q. If we press Q twice, we're going to be firing a bolt towards the enemies that deals a lot of base damage, plus max % health damage. This is the easiest to land go-to trading ability in the lane that we're going to be using. It deals max health damage, it has a nice base damage. So this ability is mainly going to be our main trading tool in lane. One big thing to understand about this ability is that this ability does not go through minions. It's a bit like a Karma Q. It has an AoE. You can angle it like AoE, but it's a bit like a Karma Q. And what does this mean? This means that this ability is going to affect our trading. If we cannot trade through minions, that means that we have to find ways around it. We either need to AoE it with minions, around the minions. That means that we got to position ourselves in the lane in a way that we can actually land this ability easily. Then, next up, we got the QW. QW is an execute, in a way. It's a very high range ability that is not easy to land, but also not hard. So this ability is very high range, and it deals more damage based upon how the enemy is missing HP. So if the enemy is like 30% HP, it's going to deal much more damage than if the enemy is full health. If the enemy is full health, it doesn't deal much damage at all. So this ability is mainly used as an execute, and it's best used when the enemy is CC'd or when they're standing still auto-attacking or walking through a choke point. But mainly this ability is used to execute the enemies, and it deals the full damage if you have it isolated. It deals more damage to isolated targets or targets that are immobilized and CC'd. So CC is a really important tool for this ability. That's why we mainly combine this ability with either an E or an R, because that provides CC for us. Then our QE, which is our main wave clearing tool. This is the lava on the ground. And what's going to happen with this ability is the ability that deals the most DPS. It's our most damaging ability in the Q category. But of course, it's the hardest to hit. It has a delay, it's damage over time. So people have to walk into this ability for multiple seconds for it to be usually useful. The way we can actually utilize this ability is 1, for wave clear. It's insanely good wave clear. 2, to farm jungle camps and jungle minions. Or 3, in the late game. Mainly in the late game, we're going to be spamming this ability because it also slows. And this ability provides immense utility and immense zone control, especially if we have this ability on a lower cooldown. What's going to happen is we're going to fire out a QE, and then the enemy, we basically block off a path for the enemies, otherwise it's going to be taking a lot of damage. And then within like 1 second of it being gone, we can throw it out again. So this is an immense zoning tool ability in the mid to late game, especially when we're first at objectives. We're going to be covering this more in the mid game section, but this is incredibly important ability at that stage of the game. Then we're going to be moving on to the W, and the W is utility based ability. And if we start with the WQ, it basically gives a path of water or whatever it is, and it grants us extra move speed in that path, and it's percentage based move speed. So if we use this on champions like Hecarim, who are already quite fast, they're going to become even faster. This is a good ability to escape with, to chase with, and to run from base to lane with, especially if we have enough mana. This ability is actually extremely useful, and the amount of move speed that you get with it is, in my opinion, severely underrated. It actually makes us quite fast. So definitely use this ability when moving from side to side, or to speed up teammates, or to chase, or to run away. Then we also got our WW. Our WW is a very nice shielding tool. It basically gives us a shield, or gives us a teammate, or in a certain location it shields allies that are in the circle. Even though on teammates it's like 50% effective or something like that. But this tool is really good against all-in champions like Yasuo, Aurelia. If they want to get onto us, it grants us a lot of shielding actually. And it also is a really good tool versus, for example, long-range abilities like Seraph R or Karthus R, and it grants us a lot of peel. So this ability is probably not an ability that we're going to be using a lot. It's just an ability that we're not using that much in the game. But if we see a good angle for it, it's going to be incredibly useful. Next up with our W, we got the WE. And the WE is probably the ability that you're going to be using the most in the game, because it enhances damage on your next 3 auto attacks or abilities, which is always nice, extra damage. Who doesn't love extra damage? But it also regenerates mana. And because Hwei has insanely high mana costs in his Q, this ability is going to be basically spammed on cooldown in lane, so we can keep queuing and poking the enemies. So we're going to be using this ability a lot. How to use this ability is what we're going to be covering in the next session of the guide. But this ability is, it's mainly used for its extra damage upon our other abilities, and it's mainly used for mana regeneration. So moving on towards our E. Our E is a crowd control utility-esque ability as well. So it's crowd control plus utility. We're going to be starting off with our EQ. Our EQ is our fear, and it's a skill shot fear that interrupts enemy dashes, interrupts enemy movement, and makes them walk away from us. This is a very good self-peeling ability. This is our main self-peeling tool that we're going to be using in the game. So against a lot of assassins like Akali, like LeBlanc, like Yone, this ability is going to be crucial to us surviving the matchup. Because of how linear those champions are, if we can fear them in their path, we're going to be able to run away, deal a lot of damage to them in return. This is basically going to be the ability that grants us self-peel. It grants us the ability to actually play certain lanes out. Without this ability, Hwei would not have been able to be playable in a lot of matchups. Then we got our EW. Our EW is a very good ability, extremely useful, very nice utility, especially in the mid to late game, but also in the lane. So the way we want to be using this ability is as a zoning tool. This is a zoning ability, because if the enemies walk into it, they get rooted, and we can actually fire off another ability after that. So this ability has a small delay before it roots people. That's why it's not really our main self-peel, but rather a zoning control tool. Compare it to a Victor W. I think that's a beautiful comparison, because Victor W also has a small delay on it. We're going to be using this in choke points when the enemies are walking into us. We're going to be using this in lane to zone enemies of cannon minions. That's my favorite by far. So use this as a zone tool, compare it to a Victor W, and then you're going to be using it correctly. And then finally we have our EE. Our EE is probably going to be our most used E ability, because this ability is the easiest to use. It is a pretty fast ability. It doesn't really have any cast time, pretty long range, pretty easy to land. So we're going to be using this ability mostly for setup with our Q, or to just poke out the enemies if they're overstepping or something like that. This ability also slows, and if it pulls enemies towards the center, so it's very nice setup, for example, our QQ or our R afterwards. And another little trick that we can do is we can actually start with QE, and then we can drag enemies into our QE with our EE. So very useful ability, displacement, and a little bit of a res and poke. That's mainly what we're going to be using it for. Of course, how do all these abilities come together? This is what we're going to be discussing in the next slide. And we're going to then really talk about combo usage. Finally, we got the ult. This ult is very interesting because it's an ult that's actually really hard to land. It's so hard to land the ult if we do not have any setup. The missile speed is not that fast. It's kind of slow actually, and it's pretty thin as well. So the way we want to be using ult is we want to be using ult as a team fighting AoE tool, and we want to be using ult as basically guaranteed damage. So I think this is also a very comparable ult to Orianna ult, but this ult is much harder to land. So the way we're going to be using ult mostly is when we have CC'd them with any of our E abilities, or if we have any setup from the rest of our team. So a very comparable ult to Orianna ult or Victor ult as well. Of course, we're going to be covering examples and how to do that later on in the guide. So right now we're going to be taking a look at some tips and tricks for Hwei's abilities and combo usage. So we're going to be starting off with a very basic trick, but it's what I see a lot of, especially beginning Hwei players not do, is that you can literally just sit on your ability before you want to throw it. So when you're going to be level 1, right, the only ability that you're going to be taking is, for example, Q, because you basically always start with Q. So what you can do is you can already press Q for the first time to make sure that you get into the second part of the Q, and you only have to press the ability once to get the ability out. This then leads to you being able to cast your Q a slight bit faster, which will also surprise the enemies. And you're going to get then a nice little bit of poke off. So in this case, it's the same principle, but in a different scenario. Right here, I'm getting ganked by a Z and also by a Silas. So I want to already sit on my E, wait until the shadow disappears, because if Z instantly comes here, and tries to dive me here, I already have my E ready to fear him, so I don't have to press E twice and then EQ. Now I can just only Q and instantly fear him. So sitting on abilities like these, when you're either under threat or when you know you're going to be using that ability next, can be helping you a lot with the speed of your ability usage. Now let's talk about some trading patterns that Hwei has. Hwei, of course, has many different combos that he can use in the lane, but the main common theme is that they're all revolving around your passive. So when you're playing in the lane, you want to be playing around your passive and trying to constantly proc your passive onto the enemy laner. Because passive is just a nice bit of extra damage, and that's what we see right here. When I'm playing against the Vex, I go EE into a WE, proc the passive, and it's a nice chunk of damage. In the next example, I hit my Q onto the Silas, I do my WE, out attack, and that's the passive. So these are basically trading patterns that you want to be going for. Next up right here, I go for the EE into QQ, proccing my passive, nice little trade onto Vex. This is basically the stuff that we want to be doing in the lane over and over and over again, trading around our passive, because the passive has no cooldown and we can proc it with 2 abilities, and it's just a nice bit of extra damage. So now we're going to be talking about some WE tips. WE is the ability from the W that we're going to be using most of the time. And this ability is actually extremely good for Hwei's kit, because Hwei's kit doesn't necessarily have too much damage, but this WE ability is actually going to increase our damage output massively if we use it well. So the thing with WE is is that it's basically an additional source of damage that you're going to be doing. So if you QQ the enemy and you activate the WE, it's going to be dealing the QQ damage plus one source of the WE damage. If you then hit the enemy with another ability, it's going to take the second part of your WE damage. So we got WE times 2. And then because you're going to be proccing your passive, it's going to hit the third part of your WE damage. So you hit all the parts of the WE damage onto the enemy laner if you do it properly in your combos. That's what makes his damage output so much more oppressive than not using your WE. So let's take a look at how we can do that. And let's take a look at some more WE tips. So first of all, we can actually activate our WE after throwing an ability. That's what we'll see right here. QQ into WE. That's what we're going to be doing. QQ, WE. And even though the QQ is in the air before I activate the WE, it still procs the little comet, and we get a nice bit of extra damage. This is especially good against T-shield users and champions that we want to be taking a little bit more burst rates in, because they're not going to be regenerating additional health because of this. This can also be applied to, for example, the QE. So we have the QE on the ground, and we then get our W up. We can, for example, WE to get that extra bit of damage for the QE that we've already thrown out. And of course, this also applies to then the next out attack E and passive. So once again, what did I just describe? The WE really amplifies our trading damage. So we want to be using it in our trades. So right here, I got all my abilities up. I'm using my QQ onto the Vex right now. QQ, WE into EE plus a passive, and it procs everything. As you can see, she is now basically forced to reset. Once again, QQ, out attack, WE of, my bad. What I do right here is a QQ, WE into an out attack to proc the second WE and the passive, and also with the E to keep him in the passive. This is basically going to be your max damage trading combo. So definitely try to add your WEs to your combos, because it's just going to massively increase your damage output. So now we're going to move on to the must-know Hwei combo. This is probably my favorite combo on Hwei. And the reason for it is because the enemies usually just don't expect it. And we can basically combine clearing waves with trading on the enemies. And this is mainly used in the later part of the lane, or like once we get a little bit of mana regeneration with the Lost Chapter. We're gonna do the QE, getting the wall of the lava on the ground. Then we're gonna drag the enemies in our lava with the EE. And while we are animating this, we are actually doing WE. So what's going to happen is we're going to get the maximum amount of damage right here, proc our passive, and therefore proc also 3 parts of our WE. And it's just a very oppressive trading combo that a lot of enemies will not respect. They're going to always try to stand outside of the minions right here when you do this, and your EE can drag them back in it. Very solid combo, clears the wave instantly and trades onto the enemies. Probably my favorite Hwei combo there is. Next up, we got, we're going to be talking about the E, and we're going to be talking about setup. Setup is really important for Hwei, because Hwei is fully centered around landing his skill shots. We need to make sure that we can land them to actually deal damage. And what I've experienced in a lot of my games, especially in the mid game, is I was just throwing out the abilities left and right, missing everything, and you basically deal no damage. You're literally useless if you start missing all of your abilities. So it's really important that you understand the concept of setup for Hwei and how important it is. And the beauty about Hwei is that his E is actually a self-setup. So we can use our E, even though it doesn't deal too much damage, to actually set up for the rest of our abilities. So in this case, we EE, and because they get grabbed towards the center, I instantly follow up with a QQ, proc the passive, very nice trade. This can also be done with, for example, our ultimate. In this case, Nemesis is actually playing Hwei right here. He sees Yasuo use the wind wall, so he knows now, okay, Yasuo has no wind wall. He cannot block my other abilities. So he walks up a little bit aggressively, feels confident, actually looks for the EE into R. And this is a great way to use R, because R is bloody hard to hit. And if we can set it up with our EE, for example, or with EQ or EW, it's actually a really good tool also for lane control. Our R actually deals a lot of damage, and especially if we combine with a QW after, we can just get a very big trade going in the lane and really pressure out the enemy lane opponent. Compare this, for example, to a Victor R or to Orianna R. It's a very similar purpose. So this is a very similar example right here. The Silas moves up in lane, misses his abilities, and because he's just walking away, not expecting the R, I can go for R plus QW, and now he has basically to reset. He cannot really play into me, because if he ever gets hit by another one of my CC spells, he instantly dies. So I use this R for lane control, and it grants me a lot of control of the lane. That's basically it. We're going to move on to QW usage. And while we're on the topic of setup, I think it's really important that we talk about how important setup is for this ability. This ability may seem like it's a good one to just throw out all the time, because the cooldown isn't that high, but it's actually not that easy to hit, especially if the enemies have hands. If the enemies don't have hands, they might just keep walking into it, but if the enemies have hands, it's pretty hard to hit. So what we want to be doing is we want to be combining that with setup. So initially right here, what I do is I actually throw out my QE into EE into R, so beautiful little combo by me. And what I then do is I wait until all the CC is gone. She is basically grounded in this position, also because she's slowed by my R, and because I see the hook from Blitzcrank coming in. And I QW onto the Jinx right here to finish her off. QW is a very good tool to finish enemy champions off, because of the fact that it deals more damage based upon missing health. So if we can combine this with setup onto low enemy targets, it's a very good finishing tool. So we land this QW, beautiful stuff. And now we're going to be taking a look at other QWs that I'm going to be throwing. So next one right here, I also hit it onto the Volibear because I use my EW onto the TP for setup. I instantly get the root. I combine it with a QW, nice little bit chunk of HP. Continuing right here, I'm throwing another EW. The idea of QW, the idea of this QW was rather good because Quinn actually slowed him. It was a bit unfortunate that Volibear got hooked, but the idea was really, really good. So, next up, I throw another QW, sadly miss it because there was no setup. It was hard to hit. Of course, sometimes you're gonna land it, but it's just generally a little bit harder to hit. Next up, I try to throw another QW and Xerath dodges it, because once again, there's no setup. So it's really important to think about the idea of setup when it comes to this ability. Next QW I'm going to throw is I have this beautiful little root with my EW onto the Pike when he's back. So I can nicely finish him off with my QW, and that's why it hits. So that's it when it comes to QW. We're going to finally cover his wave clear combo right here, because I think it's a nice little bit of tip that you can use in the early lane, but also in the mid to late game to get out of these lanes as fast as possible. We go for the EE into WE. We go for the QE into WE, and then we walk towards the side of the minions right here, so we can get a very high value EE as well. If we would be standing right here, our EE can only cover this. But if we're going to stand right here or right here, we can actually AoE the entire wave, which helps our wave clear. So we EE, we finish off all the other creeps, and if we would be under threat right now, we could already walk back and then QW this from range because it's isolated, so it deals a lot of damage. So QW, and then we reset. That's basically how we clear waves on Hwei efficiently. We're going to talk about the early lane on Hwei. So Hwei's early lane is rather interesting actually, because it really depends on the concept threat. Why does the concept threat matter so much for Hwei? Well, Hwei is a very immobile mage. He has very limited self-peel. And he is actually a champion that has a very strong early lane. But because he is so immobile and so vulnerable, he's got to be very careful with using that strong laning advantage that he can possibly get. So if we're not under threat, we can really play like a lane bully, for example, like Victor or Orianna or any other lane bully that you can think about, by pushing up waves, trying to look for good quality trades, warding and leaning properly. But if we are under threat, we gotta play a bit more with the mindset of a scaling mage. in the mindset where we try to farm up a little bit, reset on our big power spikes, and play for the later part of the lane, play for the beginning of the mid game, because that's really when we're going to be shining as Hwei at that point. So when we're playing Hwei in lane, we're basically dancing with the enemy laner. So why would we be dancing with the enemy laner? Well, that's because we're constantly looking to hit our QQ onto the enemy laner. And our QQ is a very interesting ability. And if we're going to be comparing this to a lot of other control mages, is that other control mages like Syndra, Orianna, these are not bound to the position of the minions in the lane. These control mages can just throw out their abilities through the minions, can hit through the minions, and they'll be able to hit you. Hwei actually does not really have those tools to hit through the minions. He has to walk around the minions, otherwise his QQs get blocked. Compare his QQ, for example, to a Karma Q. Very, very important that we're therefore on the right side of the minions to actually be able to hit the enemy laner, especially if we're going to be playing against Orianna or Syndra. We're constantly going to be dancing. Here's the minion wave, and this is the lane right here. We're constantly going to be dancing around the minion wave, trying to be on the same side as the enemy laner. And if the enemy laner walks to right there, we're going to be also walking to right there. That's what Hwei does, to actually try to let his abilities land. And if he's able to do that, he's actually rather strong, because his base damages are much higher than, for example, an Orianna Q or a Syndra Q that can go through minions. But it's just a little bit harder to constantly hit. So it's really important that we are constantly gathering information to understand how we want to be playing the lane. What mainly threatens Hwei is, of course, there's lane matchups that threaten Hwei, like for example Yasuo, but the main threat comes from enemy supports and enemy jungles. So if we're going to be playing against a Bard or a Pyke, and we're playing against a very heavy ganking jungler like Rek'Sai, we gotta be just adapting in the way that we want to be playing lane. We cannot really play like a lane bully, because we're just constantly on the threat. We'll get ganked all the time. That's not really what we want. In that case, we're going to be playing a little bit more slow. But if we are playing against a bit lower threat, for example, take a Karthus or a Brand jungle or an Enchanter support, with proper warding and leaning, we can actually play much more aggressive. We can actually play to trade and make it really hard for the enemies to lane. So assessing this already starts in Champion Select, because you can understand what kind of threat that you're under before the game even begins, knowing the enemy champions. So following up from the early lane, we're of course going to be talking about some basic matchup theory. What kind of playstyle do we want to be approaching when it comes to the matchups that we're going to be playing against? Going to be starting off with easy mages. So why are easy mages easy matchups for Hwei? Well, number one is Hwei has superior wave clear in these matchups, and he's not really under threat by these matchups. Their trading of these champions are not that strong, either by high cooldowns, by shorter range, or just lower base damages, like for example Seraphine. And Hwei can really abuse these matchups by, for example, taking the wave push and then looking to take good quality trades into them by using QQs, abusing his smaller range advantage, and also trying to go for the wave clear plus trade combo in QE, EE, WE. These are the type of matchups that are not really going to threaten the Hwei in the 1v1, and that we rather can push them under turret and then start chipping away at their HP bar. A little bit with the small wins mindset. Alright, so in this example, I'm going to be playing against Vex. And Vex is in the category of the easier mages. The reason for that is her cooldowns are actually quite long, and her range is kind of medium. So I can really abuse that as Hwei by taking the mid push and then looking to trade onto her with QQs and play around my passive. So in this game, I'm also playing against a Brand, and the Brand is not the highest early game threat. So if I just lean and ward properly, I should be in a fine position right here. And that would actually allow me to play a little bit more aggressive. One downside, I am playing against the Pyke, so I gotta be a little bit careful of Pyke roams, because those are actually quite threatening. So starting off, Vex actually gets the first blood kill onto Kayn, because he tried to invade. A little bit unfortunate, but it doesn't change the matchup all that often, or like all that much. So she comes back into lane, she grabs the creeps much like I do. I'm like, maybe I can get a QW onto the Brand, then I spot it's warded, and I actually decide to stay on lane. So right now, I do have this small main advantage right here, and I want to look for trades onto this Vex right now. So I missed this initial QQ, minion blocked it, a little bit unfortunate. Still does not change my plan. I reached the level 2 right here onto this creep. I reached it first over the Vex. Vex reaches now as well. Look for a little EE, and I get my combat procced. And I want to now slowly start taking the mid push here. I go for another QQ that I sadly miss. Was a little bit sloppy with these QQs. But right now, she actually used her passive and her Q. So knowing that she used her passive and a Q, I feel now comfortable to walk up. So I walk up, I go for an EE into QQ. Beautiful trade right here, proccing the passive. And now I'm just slowly chipping away at Vexer HP bar. So once again, she missed her E right here, which allows me to actually get a little bit of pressure back into lane. Out-attacking the wave a lot because I don't want to get pushed in. I'm now level 3. I use my WE in the lane a lot, because if I use my WE in the lane a lot, I can actually regenerate a lot of mana. Of course, ideally I combine that with trading, but if that's not the case, or if we don't see an instant opportunity, it's okay to just use your WE on cooldown in the early lane, because regenerating the mana is going to allow us to spam other abilities more often. So I try to get the farm right here. Vex is missing a lot of her abilities, which is going to give me a lot of freedom in the lane, which allows me to go for this EE into WE, auto attack, proccing the passive, getting all 3 of my WE procs onto the Vex, and I'm slowly just chipping away at her HP bar. So she misses her ability, I can go for QQ, nicely moved next to the minions right here. First time I really do it properly, had a little bit of warm-up needed, I see. So shove out the wave, I spotted Brand starting top side, so I want to ward the bot side right here. This is still on the old map. So, of course, next time, if in a new map, we can actually ward in the river or in this push right here, and it actually does the same job. So, right here, plan continues. Vex is very low mana, nice little QQ through the wave that allows me to AoE onto the Vex. As you can see, this QQ deals a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage, and I want to combine it with the WE and the EE, and we're just really chipping away at the HP bar here. And I'm slowly chipping away at this guy's resources and putting her under a lot of pressure in the lane. So once again, I walk next to the minion right here. I feel comfortable, and I look for this QQ into WE combo, and then also EE, and she's now pretty screwed over right here in the lane. And at 60 HP, no mana, we spot Brand, we spot Pike, I'm not under threat at all. So I want to now just hard shove this minion wave to make sure that if she backs, I can actually deny her a lot of XP. And what actually happens is she stays. So if she stays with this minion wave, we spotted the Brand just now, we spot the Pike, I can literally just walk up and zone her. One QQ will kill her. So she's under a lot of threat. And I instantly want to hard shove this next wave here as well, use all of my abilities, because if she resets, I want to make her miss as much minions as possible. So I get everything, I get the creeps, I get the next plate. Kane spots the Brand, very interesting skirmish. Doesn't really matter, I just want to shove and reset. And because of that initial good early lane, I'm now like a full level up onto this Vex. So I reset on my lost chapter, and I'm in a great position. So I want to start shoving again, and basically pressuring the Vex from this point, and constantly doing the same thing. Shoving, pressuring the Vex with nice QQs past the minions, get good quality trades onto her, and proper warling and leaning, and then I actually want to extend that mid priority that I have towards one side of the map, and then get control of objectives. Then we're also going to be looking at harder mages. So a very good example of harder mages, Syndra, Orianna, Nico. These are mages that have shorter cooldowns in the early lane, and their abilities are easier to hit because they can trade through the minions. They're not bound to a specific position in the lane. They also have similar, or sometimes even better, wave clear, and also in some cases even longer range. So against these mages, it's a little bit, it's very skill oriented. Yes, we have a little bit more base damage in a lot of cases, but we got to be able to land our abilities, and we got to be making sure that we are not going to get shoved in all the time, because then these champions can actually get favorable trades onto us. So the way we're going to be playing the waves into these matchups is ideally we're going to be slowly pushing into the enemies, and that does mean that, of course, when they have a little bit more threat onto us, that we have to be very, very clean on our warding and leaning. Of course, we're also going to be showing an example of these matchups. In this next example, I'm going to be covering a bit of the harder mages. So the harder mages are a little bit harder because of mainly the fact that these guys have a bit harder trading patterns for me to deal with. But all the other mindsets and the concepts when it comes to playing the wave actually stays the same. So in this case, I'm playing versus Soraka support. And I'm playing versus an Echo jungle. So Echo does have a little bit of threat post level 3, but Soraka doesn't really have much threat onto me. So I actually do feel comfortable starting to try to get the mid push here into Syndra to start taking good quality trades into her. So as you can see, Syndra disrespects the positioning in the lane, stands outside of the creeps against Hwei, and she gets hit by a QQ. And as you can see, it's just an insane amount of damage. This is not a damage that her Q would do to me. So I'm trying to contest the minion wave right here with my auto attacks. And try to get the mid push. That doesn't necessarily work because, as you can see right here, I was a little bit late to lane because of an early game skirmish happening right here. I was a little bit late to lane, which allowed her to get the prio, but it is what it is. We just gotta adapt. So once again, I go for another beautiful QQ next to the minion wave. This example is already much better than the last one when it comes to early game QQ usage. Syndra will reach the level 2 here onto the minions, so I gotta be a little bit careful with this. But once again, another beautiful QQ, angling it through the minions right here. Very good example of good QQ usage in the early game. And I want to take E second in this matchup. So the reason why I take E second is because I'm most likely not going to get into the range to auto-attack WE here, because she has a bit longer range than me. So with EE, I can actually try to proc passive with my Q and with my E and still get good quality trades going into the Syndra. So slowly but surely, I want to try to get a little bit of mid push while staying safe. So she uses her Q right here, so I now feel comfortable out-attacking the minions. And as you can see, she uses her Q, she needs to step up for this creep, and I punish her beautifully with a QQ into EE. With a passive proc, as you can see, Hwei's early lane actually deals a lot of damage if you use your abilities right, and you play with small wins mindset, where you slowly start chipping away at the enemy's HP. So I'm done with the fact that she is now able to push me in. So what I do is she's actually started to position herself in the minion wave. So now I actually switch it up and I go for a QE, hitting both her and thinning out the minions. Because I want to try to get the mid push, especially with this Rengar invading right here. I cannot let Syndra have the full mid push, because that's going to put a lot of threat under my Rengar. So I decide to tank the minion wave, hover topside to cover my Rengar right here, because I know that if Syndra moves, I can beat her in the skirmish because of how many good trades that I took. So I clear the minions, Syndra shows up. I want to walk past the minions to try to look for a QQ onto the Syndra. But she has a very nice QE onto me, but I do know that she has no abilities right now. So I do feel comfortable just pressuring off this wave and basically forcing her out of lane. So she walks in, go for an auto-attack QQ into WE, get the maximum amount of damage. And I don't believe she has any potions anymore. So slowly but surely, she's actually going to be under a lot of threat by me. Oh, she has one more. So basically, this continues. I'm going to be looking for these QQs again. AoEing with the creeps right here when she steps up. Beautiful QQ once again. And really pressuring this Syndra into EE, proccing the passive as well. And these trades are all fine for me because I still got potions while she's under a lot of threat without the potions. So I reach the level 5 and I go for another QQ, sadly out of range. Gonna be continuing. Once again, I go for the QQ. I missed that one sadly, so I have to basically peel myself with a EE. Using WE more for mana, warding and leading towards topside right here. I spot the Echo, and I try to go for, because she's so low, I try to go for a QW. I think I timed it pretty well when it comes to her trying to CS this creep right here. But she used a nice little QE trick, so it was a good play by her. I do have my level 6, so I try to maybe go for like a sneaky R. She dodges it, so I want to just hard shove the wave, reset, get my lost chapter refillable, and we're just in a good position from this point. So to continue from this point, I now have a lot of mana to work with. We spot the Rengar on the dragon, so I want to get mid priority to actually hover towards the side of the Rengar. And right now I just want to start like shoving waves and pressuring this Syndra. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be hard shoving this wave with QE right here, clearing it rather quickly. Try to hover towards my Gangplank, but he makes a nice solo kill. And I want to start taking trades onto the Syndra. So get this beautiful QQ right here. As you can see, insane amount of damage with one ability. And I want to just be spamming QE on the wave right now because I've got enough mana with my Lost Chapter that she cannot really match my wave push anymore. So get the wave push, pressure her that way, and when she's on the tower like this, I can just go for these QQs onto the Syndra. So sadly miss. She uses her range rather nicely. Go for an EE, hit it with my comet as well. So deal nice 100 damage. And once again, rinse and repeat. I just want to be hard showing right here. There's not much threat onto me. I've got my Rengar dominating onto this Echo. So I use 2 QEs onto the wave. I go for a nice little EE after barely missing my QE onto the Syndra. And because she's slowed right now, so close to me, I can actually go for a point blank R to get lane control. So I go for this R into QW, and as you can see, it deals an insane amount of damage onto the Syndra. And she's now under a lot of pressure in the lane, because Rengar is level 6, and he can basically just dive her. So I hard shot this next one, get a plate, get my next items, and I basically won the lane from this point here. Next up, we got the basically assassins type of matchups, the matchups that exert a little bit more threat onto Hwei. So you got 2 categories in that aspect. You got the fear-based assassins. So these assassins are actually quite manageable for us because with proper EQ usage and taking proper trades, we can actually prevent a lot of their trading patterns onto us. Take, for example, LeBlanc. LeBlanc wants to W in, and if LeBlanc W's in, we can EQ them, fear them, run away, and actually get a positive trade. Same as Yone. He uses E plus Q3. Very linear. Goes into us. We can fear him, run away. Same as Talon. Akali. Quite linear champions. Akali basically cannot really use E2 ever in this matchup. Otherwise, we can just fear her and get away from her. So these matchups are not that bad at all. We have more wave control, we can pressure them, and with proper EQ usage, we'll be able to stay alive. Actually slowly chip away at these guys, their HP bar. The main common theme of these type of matchups is that they're quite linear in the way that they trade. So in this example, we're going to be taking a look at a fear-based lane, which is going to be against an Akali. And Akali is a fear-based lane because if she ever gets an E onto me, she can actually dish out a lot of damage. But if I can prevent her getting the E onto me, I can actually slowly start chipping away at her HP bar while she basically keeps mine and I keep my HP bar high. Then this matchup is actually completely fine for me because I just got much more wave control and I can really pressure her with that. So as we can see, I already have my Q1 pressed to make it easier and quicker for me to land this second Q. So I see this beautiful opportunity through the minions, AoEing it on this creep right here with an auto attack, chipping away their HP bar. And even though she has D-shield right here, Hwei, because like, okay, so Hwei versus D-shield users, right? Let's break it down actually. D-shield users can be very annoying for Hwei, but Hwei is actually a control mage that has an A-OK time dealing with it. Because the way that Hwei interacts with D-shield is that the way Hwei wants to be throwing out his abilities is actually quite bursty. So if he goes for a QQ EE or any other combo like that, it's actually a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. So the D-shield second wind doesn't regenerate that much. So in these matchups, you shouldn't necessarily play to try to dominate them. But if you just focus on your farm, keep your health high, you can actually be fine in these matchups and still get a little bit of damage out onto them. So I'm combining this with a lot of auto attacks as well. Akali's mispositioning in lane, being very, very aggressive with her positioning, which is allowing me to take a lot of free damage onto her. But mainly we're just going to be looking to get these QQs going onto the Akali. That's the most amount of damage that's going to do. And in these melee matchups, I'm completely fine taking W secondary because I can just proc them with auto attacks. So I go for QQ and I try to get a WE auto attack to proc the passive after, but she's slightly out of range. I go for this beautiful 3-wave stack into the Akali because I can pressure her when she goes for the creeps, and eventually I'll also be able to pressure her under the tower because she's constantly forced to walk up to try and contest these creeps. So another beautiful QQ. QQ usage has been extremely good. Into an EE while we get the level 3, and we get this beautiful bursty poke onto Akali. Combining this with more auto attacks to pressure even more. And still, this wave is just slowly pushing into Akali, which is just heavily pressuring her. the wave state could not have been more perfect for me. So once again, slowly pushing into Akali. I go for a nice few out attacks, tethering her abilities herself. She gets absolutely outspaced, absolutely demolished by my abilities. As you can see, she already used her potion and she now only has the wave crashing into her right now. So she's getting absolutely destroyed right here. I can now zone her off these creeps. I know she wants to go for this cannon, so I try to time my EE with her going for the cannon, but she makes a nice little shift up in her movement and goes for the E's, but I can still hit my QQ. And I'm pressuring her heavily under the tower right here. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. I'm going to have full wave control. I'm going to be able to help my jungler. Akali now reset and TP'd. So what I want to do is I actually want to stay in lane right now and grab my lost chapter. So I want to just hold the wave, farm it out, grab my lost chapter right here. And now I'm going to be in such a good advantage with the mana lead that I have, and she does not have TP. I can now just start hard chopping waves, get full wave control, and if I hold my E correctly, she cannot really engage upon me. So I can get full wave control, play with my Rengar. That's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be getting wave control right here, make her respond to the waves. It's going to take a lot of her energy. Also going for these beautiful QQ trades. And this is a perfect example of why a champion like Akali struggles into waves, because she can never really engage onto me here, because then I'll just E her like this, she gets ulted, and then she's just in a lot of trouble right here. She has to flash even because of how much damage that I deal. And from this point, it's practically a wrap. I'm like a level up, I've got full wave control, I can fully play with my jungler, allow him to get a free kill here with his R, play for these objectives, and the game just completely spirals out of control from this point, just because of the fact that I use my E correctly in this matchup, avoid Akali getting good quality trades onto me, and slowly chipping away their HP bar, while slow building minions into the Akali to make sure that it's hard for her to get a lot of CS. We're ending it off with the hard assassins. So why are these champions so hard for Hwei to deal with? Well, that's because these champions have too much damage and a too easy time dodging out on Hwei's self-peel. Very good example is Yasuo. Yasuo has his wind wall, so Hwei, basically all of his abilities get blocked by Yasuo's wind wall, including his main self-peel with his EQ. So it makes it really easy for Yasuo to just go and trade onto Hwei whenever he wants. For example, Fizz can just dodge Hwei's EQ or other form of self-peel with his E. And his ult is rather easy to land because Hwei has no mobility. And with Aurelia, it's very similar. Wave gets stuck on her side, she can just zone off the Hwei. And she has a lot of dashes, so she can dodge the EQ. But the most important thing is, even if she just lands her stun or her R and she gets EQ'd, she still just stays the Hwei down with her Q and she just one-shots him. Zed, very similar. Just gets onto you, can play around with his shadows, dodge out on a lot of abilities, and just kill you from a distance as well. So in these type of matches, we want to play to skill, and we want to play to stay alive. So in this final example, we're going to be looking at a really hard lane for Hwei. And I think it's one of the hardest matchups is Yasuo. The reason for that is because Yasuo punishes a few things that Hwei wants to do. First of all, his W blocks practically all of our abilities. Especially the ones that we want to be throwing out in the lane. So he can basically trade onto us, go onto us whenever he wants, whenever he has his W up. Because we cannot really peel ourselves from him going onto us. That's number one. Number two is Hwei usually likes to get the wave push. But what happens if we get the wave push into Yasuo is he can just hold the wave on his side. And he can then start chasing us down the wrong lane. And since we have no self-peel, that's rather dangerous for us. So when we're playing against these very hard matchups that have a lot of early game sustain, and that we basically cannot really push into, otherwise we're just going to die, we have to adapt our playstyle. What we want to do is we want to actually try to keep the wave on your side as much as possible while getting as much farm as possible. So what I do instantly into Yasuo right here, I just let him push. I'm not trying to out-attack the minions right here. I go for the QQ, wave stays neutral, and I'll make sure that he gets the priority onto the wave right here, which he does by doing this Q. And that's completely fine for me. I don't mind taking a little bit of damage. And since the wave is pushing into me, I can just look to get all the CS. And I'm rather safe at this position. So Yasuo decides to hard shove. That's completely fine. I go for a nice little trade into him because he slightly disrespects my damage. And what I then do is I just let it crash because it's a little bit too big to hold. Next wave could be slow pushing into Yasuo, but most Yasuos, like 99% of Yasuos, have no patience at all. And they'll just mess the wave up, waste it up once again. So we're just going to let ourselves get pushed in. And this might seem boring, but it's effective. It is actually kind of boring, but it is effective. So he's just going to be slowly pushing into me all the time, going to be collecting all these creeps. He's pushing, pushing, pushing. I take a little nasty trade by getting a little bit too greedy and walking up in the lane here. But it's still okay. It's still not the end of the world. So wave state's still neutral, right? And he decides to actually let it bounce back. So in this case, once again, Yasuo is a little bit too impatient, and eventually wave state's just pushing back into me because he's trying to dash to the minions too much. And now I'm in this amazing position where we actually get ganked. And we're just farming up, right? We're all the time safe right here. I got my Lost Chapter right now. Lost Chapter plus a potion. I walk back. I do disrespect the Yasuo right here, so it would be better to just stay back right here and just let the wave come into me, because once again, wave state's completely fine. And if we keep that up, we're actually in great position. So no need to feel forced to step up to do anything like this, because once he gets the opportunity to get onto me right here, you're fucked. I lose my flash, he ults, and I'm basically almost dead and I have to take this pretty bad reset right here. Luckily, I still have TP, so I can fix it, but it's still not ideal. It would have been much better for me to just stay back, keep my health high, and just give 1 or 2 creeps and basically skill up. So we're moving on to the border patrol mindset. So why the border patrol mindset on Hwei? Hwei can adopt the border patrol mindset because in the mid game, because he wants to be first at areas and he wants to make it hard for the enemies to enter. So when the enemies come walking into Hwei, it makes it easy for Hwei to get his damage off. He has the QE, he has the EW for setup, and it's also easier to land your R when the enemies are walking into you. Hwei can basically use these choke points and make it really hard for the enemies to enter, and has tools to keep the enemies out of certain areas where he doesn't want them to be there. But for that to happen, he needs to be there first. If he is walking into the enemies, he's going to really struggle hitting his abilities. His QE and EW zoning tools are not going to be that strong. This is very comparable to also, for example, Orianna that wants to be first at objectives and wants to control certain choke points with her ball. Hwei is very similar, but his ball is basically the QE and the EW. So keep in mind, right? Hwei in the mid game needs to land his abilities to be useful, and because he's so skill shot oriented, it's actually not that easy to do that. So it's much more easy already when the enemies are walking into him, but he mainly needs setup from either his E or his teammates CC to land his R. Landing your R in team fights is crucial. If we miss it, we've made a grave mistake, and I'm always looking for setup when I'm playing Hwei in those team fights. So what does Border Patrol not do? So Border Patrol is keeping enemies from entering the area that they're not supposed to be in. But Border Patrol is not like a special service. They're not going to go towards enemy territory, and they're not going to go search these enemy threats up themselves. No, they're staying where they are and just preventing the enemies from coming in. And another thing that Border Patrol does not do is they don't use all of their resources on one potential threat. What they do, Border Patrol is not one person. It's multiple persons. They call backup. They got to make sure that they can always keep the line and make it hard for the enemies to enter. And if they see a threat, yes, they do use some resource onto it, but not everything. And finally, what are final areas of importance for solid Border Patrol? First of all, key threat assessment. Understand who the threats are. Understand who you want to keep out. Patience. If someone or just one car shows up, we don't want to throw everything on the car, clean them out. No, we want to have patience and use our basically our resources on the right time and the right target. We also want to keep the enemies and the threats out of our area. And therefore, to do that, we need to be first. Otherwise, it's really hard to keep someone out of an area that you don't own. And then finally, we want to use the available resources that Border Patrol has. You got multiple people working in the organization. It doesn't exist one man. So make sure to use your teammates. Make sure to use them as tools and use them for the setup so it's easier for you to use and land your abilities. Mid-game and lull states. Hwei wins the game through front-to-back teamfights where the enemies are walking into him. We want to be first at the area. And we want to make it hard for the enemies to enter using our QE, using our EW, using our zone control to keep the enemies out. Apply the border patrol mindset in these type of situations. So we want to be doing that at positions where we can let the enemies come into us. And the best way to do that is to lure the enemies in for a fight while using the neutral objectives, being the dragon, being the Rift Herald, being the Baron, as magnets to lure the enemies in. So make sure that we're first by shoving mid-wave, then taking control of the area, and then trying to keep the enemies out while you guys are securing the objective. Hwei is a champion with skill shots, and it's really important that we're going to be hitting these skill shots. If we don't hit the skill shots, we're going to be useless. I'm going to be showing you guys a beautiful example of a situation where we actually are going to hit all the skill shots and we're going to win the fight. And just after, I'm going to be showing you guys an example of where I miss practically every type of skill shot in the game and we get completely wiped. So that's definitely a good example of why it's so important to have setup and hit your skill shots and take it easy in those fights as well. Mainly, when it comes to these fights, we want to be aiming for QEs. QEs are going to be basically spammable, and these abilities are the best type of zone control because they linger long on a duration, it refreshes our cooldown after we've used it, and it's perfect zone control because we use it in choke points and we can make it really hard for the enemies to enter. Then, one thing to note about Hwei. Hwei is not a 1v9 carry champion, right? He really struggles killing tanks, especially in the late game. His strongest point is the later part of the lane and the early part of the mid game. Hwei rather excels in his utility. And yes, he can be quite good in the late game if you set up a good situation for him, where he can actually zone the enemies out using his zone control. But don't expect to 1v9 carry. He needs his teammates. He needs setup. Another thing, when it comes to mid-game and lull states, we want to value our life at all times. We are very vulnerable to enemy threat. We've got no dashes, very little self-peel. So it means that we got to be very careful in the side lane. We mainly want to go to the side lane to catch waves, shove waves. And most of my losses were because of me dying and making the game too chaotic. Hwei is not a champion that likes chaotic games. He wants controlled games. So what happens when we die and get caught in the side lane? Number one is we actually lose resources. So we lose the ability to play for our key spikes, which is rough. But the most important thing is that if we die into the side lane, we're going to lose tempo. And most of the times, that's going to be a problem. Sometimes it's going to be okay, but most of the time it's going to be a problem because if we lose tempo, what we then have to do is we have to then shove out those waves again, then move mid, get control. So it's going to be really hard to be first at objectives if we're going to be dying in the side lane all the time. So in the lull states, right, what do we want to be thinking about in the game? We want to be thinking about key threats, making sure that we stay alive. We want to be thinking about when is the next objective, because we want to be there first and then let the enemies come into us. And then finally, once we have that position of the objective, which zones do we want to control? Where do we want to make it hard for the enemies to enter? If we're going to be asking ourselves these questions in the mid game, we're going to be in a great position. Let's take a look at an example. So in this example, we're actually quite far ahead. And the only thing that we have to do right now to close out this game is by playing for these objectives, keeping the enemies out. And this way does it actually perfectly. So what he does is he recognizes Nunu starts the Herald and he places himself in a position that makes it really hard for the enemy jungle to enter and try to steal the objective right here. So the beauty about him being positioned right here is if Lee Sin tries to walk in, he has to go through here, so we can basically throw our QE right here, our EW right here, and we can make it really hard for Lee Sin to enter through this choke point. Not only is this a choke point that we can play for, we can also play for the choke point after this right here. So if we have to give up this position because they try to push through, we can also play for the next choke point a little bit more down there. So there's multiple choke points that we can make it hard for them to enter. So we try to steal the little raptor right here, but because we stand right here, it's practically impossible for the enemies to enter, and Nunu then grabs the Rift Herald. So what do we see on the minimap? The dragon is next. So instantly we're already moving towards bot side because we also want to be grabbing the dragon. The enemies have 2 drakes. We don't want to give them another because then we actually give them a potential win condition on the dragon soul. So we're all moving down right here. We spot the Lee Sin go to his Gromp. So what do we want to be doing? Is we want to be controlling this zone right here, making it hard for him to enter. And we actually go a little bit deeper. We zone the Lee Sin off from his Gromp right here. We don't necessarily get the kill, but we do keep the enemies out. We do get flanked here by the enemy. Rankton was a really good flank, and now we actually are in a little bit of trouble because we are in a zone in a choke point ourselves. So very good flank by the Rankton, but because we get a very nice QE off right here, we deal a lot of damage to the enemy teams. To the enemy team, we also get I think it was a pretty solid R off. So we do eventually kill them, which leads to us getting a dragon and eventually taking full control of the game. Let's take a look at another example. Alright, so in this example, we're taking a look at another Hwei game. He TP stop to grab a kill onto Orianna, and what do we see right now? Herald is up, so we want to be playing for this Herald right here. He knows that they killed Orianna, so they got a little bit of time. So what he does is he actually shoves the next top wave right here, and he then moves in towards the Herald to try to take the area, because right now the Graves is also ready to take the objective. So what do we see right here is we see Lee Sin tries to walk in. What is very good from what he's doing right now is he actually tries to make it hard for Lee Sin to enter. So he gets a beautiful EQ into QQ combo with R, and this basically puts Lee Sin so low that it's really hard for him to fight. And then we get a beautiful Malphite flank that actually kills the Lee Sin. And we basically prevent the enemies from getting in. And they try to walk in, they failed, and then they get absolutely wiped. So we basically guarantee ourselves the Rift Herald. So next up, what do we know is we just grab the Rift Herald. Next objective is most likely going to be Dragon. So this guy opens a bot lane, shoves a bot wave. He knows that the enemy does have tempo advantage right now. So it's going to be he's got to be very careful, because they can just collapse onto him right here. So he knows that, and he plays very safe. Tries to get some vision right here, and he once again returns the bot wave. And as we see right now, Dragon is coming up rather shortly. So what he wants to do is he actually wants to group up with his team, get a front to back situation, and then make it hard for the enemies to enter by controlling the area. As we can see, we have beautiful vision around mid, so it would be really nice if we can just group up together with our team right here on mid and then start controlling the area. But he gets a little bit greedy, forgets about the enemy threat. He gets collapsed upon by Leona and the Lee Sin right here. And they get a beautiful shutdown onto the Hwei. So it was really well played by the enemy team. Perfect vision usage and understanding of what they were supposed to be doing. So really good play by the enemy team, but Hwei got his R off and his team was really close. So they were able to eventually capitalize and still get the dragon. So what he could have done right here was what would have been a little bit better is understanding, okay, I don't spot the Lee Sin, I don't spot the Leona. These are key threats to me because they can change CC me, jump onto me, kill me. So I just want to take the blue buff and then rotate to my vision towards my teammates, then get that front to back situation so we can actually be safe and then make it hard for the enemies to enter with our zone control. It would have been a little bit better, but still overall, very good situation while we get the dragon afterwards. So in this final example, we're going to be taking a look at one of my own examples where I completely missed the mark and basically solo lose the game. So first of all, we're in a position where it's 18-18. So the game state is actually pretty equal right now. But as you can see, I'm 4-1, so a lot of the gold is on me. That means that also the burden to play well in these team fights is also on me. We're starting off with the fact that Herald's alive, Dragon's coming up. So it's really important that I'm on mid wave because we want to get mid lane control. So we can then translate the mid lane control into vision towards either side of the map. And we can then play for that respective objective by being first. So fighting for this mid lane control, Jinx steps up, makes a grave mistake stepping up. I slow her with my EE, get the big R onto her and get this beautiful little shutdown onto the Jinx. So that's a very good start of the fight. I'm playing in the backline right here, see the Volibear TPing in. And I go for this another nice little combo, chaining him up and basically dealing a lot of damage towards the Volibear. We eventually are able to kill the Volibear here as well. So we're in a great position right here. 2 more kills for me. This little sieging continues. We now want to get vision control in the enemy bot side because the dragon is coming up. But first, Blitzcrank dies. We get a nice little EW into QW, kill onto the pike beforehand. And right now I'm rather low. So because the dragon is up, I've got TP up. I want to reset. I want to spend my gold before this next big objective fight, which is what I do. So what I do, for some reason, I'm gonna ward topside. This makes no sense. I don't want to be warding topside right here. I want to actually go towards bot, be there first, make it hard for the enemies to enter. So this ward is a little bit out of place. And what we see afterwards is, okay, the enemy team is already fighting in this choke point. So it would have been really nice if I would already be standing here and actually look for damage onto the enemy team right here. So make a small mistake when it comes to the time and positioning of before this team fight. But still, I land a pretty good QW. Jinx got a shutdown onto the Ezreal, and I'm just not realizing what my job is here. I'm just too slow at realizing I need to make it hard for the enemies to enter right here with QE usage. That's really important. So what I do is I actually look for QQ onto the pike. I don't kill. Now, this zone is completely free for the enemies to walk in. Then I actually go for an EE. I do land it onto the Xerath, but I'm too slow with my R. So what actually happens is I EE, but I'm too slow with my R. Xerath runs out of my R, and now I've landed not a single ability, right, basically. And once I miss my R is a form of setup for the rest of my abilities, so it's going to be even harder for me to land the rest. But it's still okay. We still got the area. It's still not over yet. These guys are low. Only thing I need to do is just QE through the choke point right here and keep them out. Let's guess what I do. Actually go for a QW. So what's going to happen? I'm going to make it rather easy for these guys to just walk in. Then I go for another QW while the Jinx has a lot of move speed and she just dodges every single one of my abilities. Still, it's fine. I still got the choke point to control, right? No, I still don't use the QE. And I make it really easy for the enemies to enter and eventually just die. And I basically, this is end of review. I lost the game right here. And all on me because I was not using my abilities properly, which led to us, basically missed everything as well, which led to us just simply losing this team fight right here. So what I should have done is thrown more QEs to basically prevent the enemies from walking in right here. Be here sooner so I can actually control the chokes, support my teammates with my zone control and damage. And instead of going for this EE, it would have been much better to actually go for an EW right here. Control the choke, make it hard for the enemies to enter. Or I go for the EE into Insta-R so I can actually pressure the Xerath right here. That would have also been completely fine. But going for all these QWs doesn't make sense. And yeah, basically allows the enemies much more safe passage through all these chokes and makes it really easy for them to enter and just kill us on repeat. So this fight is fully on me. I learned a lot from this fight. When I reviewed this, I got a big smile on my face because I realized I only landed one ability in the entire fight. So that's okay. This happens to everyone. You learn from it. So let's talk about Hwei in draft. What does Hwei like to see in his teammates' champions? First of all, he likes to see a front line. A front line is going to allow him to actually stand in front of him and make it easier for him to control the choke points so he doesn't have to be the front line himself. Moreover, he wants setup. Why does he want setup? Well, we've covered it a lot already because it makes it a lot easier for him to land his abilities, mainly his R. And if he wants to go for different kind of Qs, also different kind of Qs. So a champion like Maokai or Vi or Rel or Nautilus is so good for him because it basically gives him a little bit of front line and also applies a lot of setup for him, which makes it super easy for him to land the rest of his abilities. Also, DPS is also something he likes because he struggles killing tanks. So a champion like Jinx can really help him excel through the later parts of the game where he sometimes struggles against a bit more beefy champions. So what does he not like in his team? He does not like a damage spread of AP champions, of course. It doesn't really work with him already being heavy AP as well. He struggles against tanks, so if the enemies build a lot of MR, it's not really ideal for him. He also doesn't like low CC champions because that gives him no setup, makes it really hard for him to land his abilities. And a champion like Master Yi doesn't also really apply any frontline, doesn't really gank him. So he's basically on his own. And if he's then playing against a champion like Pike or like Naughty, Nocturne, while he has a Yi, he's just going to struggle. He's just going to die a lot. That's just the reality of the situation. So what does he like to see in the enemy team? He likes to see some linear champions that are just have no mobility, that they're just walking into him, that he can just control the choke points with, and then make it very hard for them to enter. These champions also have a bit lower range, so they actually are forced to get into his range to be able to do something. And if he's ahead against these type of champions, it's going to be practically impossible for them to play if Hwei is first at the objectives and makes it hard for them to enter by controlling these choke points. So what does he not like to play against? Well, we see these very mobile assassins that can just dive onto him, CC him, kill him. Champs like Nautilus just flash over the wall, just press R onto him. It's just very hard for him to peel against that type of stuff, especially if the enemy have multi-threat, more than one champion that just wants to kill him. He's just gonna die a lot if we don't position ourselves properly and if we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. Of course, counters to this is team fighting, proper positioning, standing in the back line, standing behind our front line. Then we're gonna be okay. And you can also go like Zonia, stuff like that. There's tools against it, but in general, it just limits our way of playing. So finally, we're going to be talking about common mistakes and the things to look for in the review when we're playing Hwei. In the early lane, the main thing that I see, especially in the sessions that I've done with Hwei, is that the players are not playing around their own cooldowns and their passive, and they're losing out on a lot of trading power, taking a lot of free damage. Or that they're actually not warding and leaning properly and dying. Another thing that you see a lot is that the players just are not quite sure how they're supposed to be playing the waves in each matchup and what it makes that when they can push up or when they need to get pushed in. They don't understand the concept of threat. And I really hammered in on the early lane section on the concept of threat, so feel free to revisit that. It will make the situation a bit more clear. If you got any questions about this, always feel free to send me a question in the comments and I will be able to get back to you. We also have a lot of E usage mistakes. We got matchups, a certain category of matchups that are very, very dependent on if we use our E correctly or not. And if we do, those matchups are going to be quite playable. But if we don't, those matchups are going to be quite hard. And a lot of players don't understand how to use the E in those matchups. They throw it out, they get engaged upon, they die. And it's just very, very unfortunate because once we start dying on Hwei, it's gonna be rough. It's gonna be a rough game. In the mid game, what we see a lot is that we miss our abilities a lot before or in team fights, or we don't understand the concept of zone control. And these two kind of go hand in hand. I've made a lot of these mistakes myself as well in my Hwei journey. And if you're just going to be missing your abilities, you're going to be dealing no damage. If we're not going to be controlling zones, what are we going to be doing as Hwei? Because that's kind of the identity of our champion. And we need to be landing our abilities for that as well. If we're going to take a look at the final point right here, landing R is so important on Hwei. If we don't land our R, we miss a big part of our damage. And we need setup to consistently land the R. So we want to combine it with an E. And once we land the R, we can then follow up with, for example, QW or QE to get even more AoE damage onto the enemies. So really look at your R usage in these team fights in the mid game. If we miss our R, we got to figure out, okay, what were the opportunities where we actually could have landed our R? With, for example, setup from yourself or setup from your teammates. And then the final thing is, of course, not grouping for neutrals and being first at the objective. If we're not first, we're going to just really struggle as Hwei because our champion does not want to walk into the enemies. We don't have any engage possibilities. We're very vulnerable to flanks especially, and other AoE and zone control. So we want to be the one controlling the zones. We want to be first. And if we're not first, it might even be worth calling objectives offs. So I thank you all for watching this guide. I put a lot of effort into it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments and I will definitely get back to you. Otherwise, I'm going to see you guys next month with a new guide, which is also going to be very exciting. Thank you all for watching and see you guys next time.